The first televised report on migrant farm workers was broadcast 35 years ago.
This is CBS Reports, Harvest of Shame. It has to do with the men, women, and children who harvest the crops in this country of ours, the best-fed nation on earth.
Back then, we called what we did to our migrant workers exploitation. The new migrant says that's still the case, but also calls it opportunity.
We really need the help out here to do our jobs.
Are you saying that without the Mexican workers coming in,
We're dead.
We found in talking to workers that 1 out of 6 had been exposed to pesticides in the fields that very week that we interviewed them.
Where farmers have become involved, we've seen dramatic improvements in living and working conditions.
But while some are living well, others live as virtual slaves.
He said, no, I cannot leave unless I pay.
Are you frightened?
Say it.
Yes.
Sheriff's office,
What's wrong with the country? Why don't the farmers comply with the laws? Why is this even an issue that people who are working don't have a right to certain basic minimal conditions for them and their families?
CBS reports Legacy of Shame with CBS News correspondents Dan Rather and Randall Pinkston.
In 1960, Edward R. Murrow stood in a field such as this and told Americans about the forgotten people, the men, women, and children who harvest the crops in this, the best-fed nation on earth. That broadcast was called Harvest of Shame, and this area around Belle Glade, Florida, has become a place of pilgrimage that we journalists make every decade or so, always coming to the same conclusions, that these are still the forgotten people, that conditions for them are still awful. CBS Reports has spent the last year in the groves and fields of America, and as my colleague Randall Pinkston and I discovered, the story of today's migrant laborer changes depending on where you choose to look. Here's where we usually look first. Near the Rio Grande River, on the Mexican border. And this is how we usually meet our prospective agricultural workers. Their first interview is likely to be with the Border Patrol. These people are fighting their way into our system so that for one more year, their families can survive. And while we seem not to want them, for one more year, we will eat the least expensive food on earth.
Keep it going, Ron.
These two are both prototype and stereotype of the migrant worker. A husband and wife. She is 7 months pregnant. He is a farm worker. They are 2 of thousands who will try to cross the Rio Grande this night, without papers, without money, and without prospects.
The reason he come here to work is he works here for 2 days, makes as much as he makes in 15 days over there.
So he's coming across to work?
Right.
But you have a job to do.
This is it. I have kids to feed too.
And you got to take them in.
Right.
To get an idea of why they come here, you have to travel south. It's a small town in the Mexican state of Chihuahua, but it could be anywhere below the border. You only need look around to see why the Mexicans migrate toward us. There's no way to make a living here, and a prolonged drought coupled with the latest financial crisis hasn't made life any easier. It's late spring. Juan, a migrant farm worker, is about to leave his wife and 3 children. He has no idea for how long. It's the American planting season, and this is happening in thousands of homes all across Mexico. Juan speaks no English, has no papers, and has been caught 3 times by the U.S. Immigration Service. Still, he has no choice but to go. To harvest our crops, the Mexican people sometimes pay a terrible price. It has taken 2 days for Juan and his cousin Roberto to reach the border at Nogales. They're halfway through what's called the long commute. They're now in the hands of a coyote, a smuggler who has promised to take them to Phoenix for a fee of $150.
Yes, I'm breaking the law, but I feel justified in the fact that I'm helping people get to their destination, find a job, better themselves. And you gotta admit, there is a big adrenaline rush when you do this. And these two guys that are going up, their hopes are very high, their dreams are very high. And I really hope to God they make it.
They did make it. This is Guadalupe, a bedroom community for migrant workers, some legal, some not, on the outskirts of Phoenix. Here, Juan and Roberto hook up with family and friends that have already arrived. Many Mexican towns have American sister cities to which farm workers commute every year. But right now, there's no farm work here, so Juan and Roberto take odd jobs for cash and prepare to leave for another sister city in Texas. When we come back, it's on to El Paso and how a well-meaning government can make a worker's life miserable. For the most part, Americans believe in a free market, a natural flow of labor and capital. In border states, that concept seems to work not only for the grower, but for the migrant worker as well. That's not to say we shouldn't be ever vigilant, but what we found in places like Texas and New Mexico is some government regulations help the farm workers and others hurt.
They've created so many regulations and they can't administer them to them all. You can call the Department of Labor right now and you're going to get a recording.
2 a.m. in downtown El Paso, an hour before the morning shape-up. Searches here for illegal workers are rare during chili harvest time, though they'd be easy enough to find. There's virtually no housing here for the thousands of laborers coming from Mexico and other parts of Texas, and regulations are largely to blame.
We leave the people to sleep on the streets because a nice place to live is not good enough. It has to meet more stringent requirements than probably Dino's house or my house could even meet.
Regulations have become so strict that a farmer would never dare, in most cases, even try and provide housing.
I wouldn't touch a housing for a farm worker if my life depended on it.
But did you ever provide housing?
Oh, it used to be common. But anymore, the legal threat's there to where I wouldn't even think of it.
Most housing regulations seem reasonable. Good drinking water, sanitation, and protection from the elements. But some are vague. For example, housing must be constructed to exclude vermin and insects. Not easy. A small tear in a window screen and a grower could be fined. Other rules seem oddly specific. At least 100 square feet of space per worker, beds 36 inches apart.
The conditions of agricultural workers in the United States are a disgrace.
Carlos Morentes runs a small agricultural labor union, spending his time trying to get farm workers off the streets. Every night, with the help of Sacred Heart Church in El Paso, he organizes a shelter for them.
On average, what would it cost to rent a one-room apartment in El Paso for a week?
An apartment, for example, for a couple would cost easily $100 a week.
A week?
Yes.
That's as much money as they make in a week?
Yes.
Here, they pay $2 a night when they can afford it. It's not much. A shower, a bathroom, and a few square feet of hardwood floor. But Morentes told us the Border Patrol has never raided the shelter during harvest season. When Juan and Roberto, our undocumented laborers from Chihuahua, arrived in Texas, they, like everyone else, had a housing problem. But like most veteran migrants, these two are highly adaptive, and in less than 48 hours, they found a solution. They pooled their money with two other workers, bought an old van, and made it into home sweet home. At 3 a.m., the shape-up begins. Drivers, called rateros, start assembling the workers, choosing who works and who doesn't.
Most farm workers don't own cars. And so there's a system in place, usually of relatives or friends of the labor contractor, who for from $3.50 to $5 cash a day will bring the workers to the job. Oh, and by the way, You know, if you want that job, you got to ride in this car. So it's a system that works well. The raitero is there, he gets his cut, and then there's a labor contractor, and he gets his cut.
Labor contractors, or crew leaders as they're sometimes called, are licensed by the United States government. Farmers pay them a specified amount per worker, and they hire the labor.
Crew leaders, for the most part here, make their money by breaking the law. If a crew leader complied with all the federal safety laws, wage and hour laws, insurance laws, paid Social Security, paid unemployment, paid all the things he legally had to pay, they could not make money.
Here's one way they get around the law. At the shape-up, we noticed that the drivers were running away from our cameras.
Well, they think you belong to the Department of Labor or the legal aids, and they probably they're afraid of them because they don't have enough money to pay insurance, and when they start harvesting chili, they stop everybody.
The insurance regulations were put into effect because too many workers were being injured in rickety old buses. On the surface, a good idea, but
the insurance is so high that the cost of the insurance per year is as much as 6 to 8 times the cost of the bus. Rather than the Labor Department coming out and trying to get the unsafe buses off the road, they just blanket tell everybody you got $5 million liability insurance. And so now most of the buses are off the road and nobody has a free ride to work anymore.
The people sit there in their ivory towers. They've never been on a farm. They've never talked to the people. They've never come out during chili harvest or onion harvest or anything else.
there's at least one ivory tower resident that does. As a child, Maria Echeveste, along with her parents and siblings, worked in the fields of California. She now heads the Wage and Hour Division of the United States Department of Labor, enforcing the minimum wage of $4.25 an hour.
The people I talk to are so much like my parents. They're asking for help. They're really asking for help.
Does it make a difference that you and your family actually worked in the fields?
Perhaps other people who haven't had that experience might not feel it the same way, but there have been many, many advocates on behalf of farm workers who never worked a day in their life in the fields.
You'll find most of those people working for Rural Legal Services, a government-funded law project. While they're the only legal advocates a farm worker has, Congress is about to severely reduce their budget. Echeveste uses these people as her eyes and ears.
I know we have disputes as to who cherry picks the cases.
Talking to workers in El Paso, I realized that there are ways we can do our investigations better. Talking to people while they're picking is not necessarily the best way to get information. They're trying to earn a living, and the foreman may be standing right over in the next row. How are they going to talk to you? You ask them, well, when did you start work and when did you finish? And they say, well, it adds up to 9, 10 hours, but the receipt only is 6 or 7 hours. And you ask them, you knew it was false. Why did you accept it? And they say to you, because I wouldn't have a job the next day. When I was out there at 3 in the morning and realized that some of them knew where they were going to work, but others didn't. And it was this sense of total insecurity. You can have a situation where people feel that they can't stand up for their rights because they won't have a job the next day.
We came to El Paso because there's comparatively little worker abuse. Farmers who try to honor the law, and committed public advocates. Still, there's a brutal human price to be paid for our food.
These people out there at 1 o'clock in the morning sleeping on the streets, I mean, that just seems a little bit un-American, can I say that?
Sure.
Inhumane?
That's definitely that. That is a perception that everybody wants to sell. Yeah, there are people sleeping in the streets and something should be done about them, okay? But don't sit here as an agriculture employer and say, you've got to do it. You're a member society too. Does it bother you that that person's sitting on the streets?
And how much does it bother you?
And how much does it bother you?
And how much is it worth to you?
If you want those people to quit sitting in the streets, you're going to give me another 10 cents for my bell peppers.
When we come back, to the Deep South and the vestiges of slavery.
150 different attempts have been made in Congress to do something about the plight of the migrants. All except one has failed. The migrants have no lobby.
35 years ago, there were virtually no laws protecting migrant workers. Not so anymore. Now the problem isn't the laws, it's their enforcement. Clarendon County, South Carolina. It's 9 a.m. in this cucumber field, and the terms of employment are 50 cents a bucket and all the booze you can handle.
Alcoholics, but alcoholics out here drink all day.
The worst features of the old agriculture can still be found here. For real. In these parts, the specter of slavery is kept alive by poverty and addiction. There are few African Americans left in the fields, even fewer whites. And like the foreigners vying to replace them, they're vulnerable to exploitation. But laborers held prisoner by substance abuse is hardly the worst of what we found. When we got here, we began to hear rumors of workers held prisoner for real.
They had them in a camp back off from the road. You couldn't even see the camp from the road. And they were like they were in prison back there. And they couldn't go anywhere without somebody with them, and they were all in one long building like we keep animals.
Mi nombre es Rubén Chávez, mucho gusto. ¿Cómo les va?
Ruben Chavez is a farm worker advocate who worked for Rural Legal Services.
¿Ustedes vienen de Guatemala? Sí.
Who paid for you to come here?
Cada quien pagó su viaje? Each one of us paid our trip.
How much?
2,000 quetzales.
2,000 quetzales, Guatemalan, about $400 maybe.
How much have they told you will be making here?
Pues aquí no se sabe, no nos han dicho nada.
Well, we don't know. They haven't told us anything.
If you wanted to go back right now, could you leave?
No, we can't do that.
So you have to stay here and work until you pay off your debt.
Yes, that's the way it is.
Most of what's going on here is illegal. The workers clearly didn't pass through immigration. They weren't told what their wages would be. They can't leave until their debt is paid. That's indentured servitude. What you're seeing here, too, is history repeating itself. According to this confidential FBI document, a government task force raided this camp in 1992. At the time, a crew leader named Miguel Flores was in charge. The Department of Labor fined him only $8,100 for wage and labor violations. A bargain, considering the money to be made. And though 22 illegal workers were found, immigration didn't fine Flores at all. Miguel Flores is still in charge here.
Well, now, why are there guards?
Well, because anybody tries to leave the camp without having fulfilled their debt obligations, that's a no-no.
We tried to find Miguel Flores at another camp he was running in the area.
These little kids here.
Are these workers or
These are workers.
These kids are workers? How old are you?
15.
15. 15? Is your father here with you? Your mother here with you?
No, no tengo.
Where are your parents?
¿Dónde están tus padres?
Está en Guatemala.
He told us he came without his parents' permission and was brought here by a coyote named Alfredo, as was this boy, who said he paid $450 for the trip.
What would happen if you tried to leave without paying him?
No, tengo que pagar.
He said, no, I cannot leave unless I pay.
What did he tell you would happen to you if you left without paying?
¿Qué te dijo a usted si usted sale de este campo sin pagar?
Me quieren mandar para Guatemala si yo no pago.
He will send me to Guatemala if I do not pay.
And what would happen to you when you got to Guatemala?
¿Y qué te harían en Guatemala cuando llegas allí?
Me va a meter en la cárcel, dice.
They're going to send me to jail. That's what he tells me.
Are you frightened?
¿Tienes miedo?
Sí.
Yes. That sounds like the typical kind of setup that they have here. They use these scare tactics, threaten the people and follow through with their threats that if they don't pay off their debt, then they will be taken to Guatemala and either beaten or put in prison there.
What is peonage?
Historically, it's been a situation where an individual is held against his will by either force or threats of force.
Greg Schell has been following the activities of Miguel Flores for 7 years. He's an attorney for Florida Rural Legal Services.
If you take the definition as being held against your will, it is peonage in that sense, no question about it, because those workers even if they chose to leave, even if there wasn't violence, they don't have any money. They're in the middle of nowhere. They have no choice but to continue to work because that's their only ticket out.
Places that we saw yesterday did not appear to be fit for human habitation.
Well, you'd have to take that up with your government. He inspected everything.
David Heelan's family owns the housing used by Flores workers and contracts with Flores to harvest his fields.
Do you know where Mr. Flores gets the workers from? Do you know where these people come from?
I don't have any idea.
Is it of concern to you that people would be brought here and basically held in peonage?
Yeah, I don't, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that happens.
If you could give us a pointer to where we could find Mr. Flores, that would be most helpful.
I don't have any idea where he's at.
We're looking for Miguel Flores.
I don't know.
You don't know him?
Oh.
He's actually a sub-crew leader for Miguel Flores.
¿Usted no trabaja con Miguel Flores?
In the murky world of freelance agriculture, uncovering a crew leader's operation can be difficult. This man also denied working for Miguel Flores. Not true. And when we asked his name, he gave us an alias.
Mr. Flores?
In the end, we must have shaken something loose because Miguel Flores found us.
CBS.
With him was Marion Eden, a farmer who runs the local packing shed.
Some of your workers tell us, sir, that they're not allowed to leave until they repay the debt and they have to work it off.
No.
Yeah, you know that's called peonage. I mean, it's not supposed to be permitted.
No. If they had been mistreated, why in the world when they leave? There's no fence around anything.
But you see, that's what they're saying, that they can't go home because they owe him money.
I know about everything that goes on around here. That don't happen around here.
No, mi money, little boys.
Not holding anyone against their will, huh?
No.
You ask, I tell you what, you ask anybody out here that wants to leave, and I'll get a bus right now to come pick them up.
Well, they're not going to tell me in front of you. They're afraid. They think they're going to get beaten up by someone.
No.
In 1976, Miguel Flores was convicted for smuggling illegal aliens. He came here illegally himself, but now has a green card. According to law enforcement sources, he's used 3 aliases, 3 dates of birth, 2 driver's licenses, and 2 social security numbers. In 1982, he was arrested after a knife assault on a farm worker. The charges were dropped.
Gritándoles. He would yell at them. Amenazándolos. He would threaten them.
Ronaldo Darris and his 2 brothers worked as drivers and sub-crew leaders for Miguel Flores and saw him abuse his workers.
How did he threaten them? What did you see him do?
He said that if they would run away from work and he would see them again, that he would kill them.
Did you ever see him hit anyone?
Sí, muchos. Yes, many.
You saw him hit workers? With his fist or with weapons or what?
Con sus manos o armas o con las manos. With his hands.
How, you wonder, does this kind of thing go on without detection? The answer is, it doesn't.
Shortly after Secretary Reich took office, I wrote him a long letter detailing the specifics that we had heard regarding Miguel Flores' operations, particularly in South Carolina. First of all, we never received a response. Secondly, it doesn't appear that any affirmative action was ever taken on the complaint.
Why didn't the department determine whether these things are true or not, and if they were true, to act on them?
The department did look into it. The department met with the sheriff's office down there. The department also had meetings with the FBI. In fact, there was a recent meeting just a few months ago in which the department looked into the evidence and turned over whatever evidence we have to the appropriate authorities.
The reason that they handed it over is that the Labor Department has no enforcement powers when it comes to peonage. The Immigration Service cares only if the workers are here illegally, and at Justice, peonage is a very low priority offense. Nevertheless, after we spoke with Secretary Reich, Labor, Immigration, and Justice made a beeline down here. And so did we. Obviously, there were more questions for Miguel Flores. We found him near his home in LaBelle, Florida.
We're told by the Darris brothers that you and the people that you hire have threatened workers, have beaten workers.
How you take his picture? Show me one picture.
I don't have the pictures of anyone being beaten.
Because somebody told.
What's going on? What are you on candid camera? Who are these guys? Who are you?
Who are you?
I'm his attorney.
My name is Randall Pinkston. I work for CBS News.
Miguel, don't even talk to him.
Okay. Mr. Flores. Mr. Flores, we have documents here showing that you owe the government $162,000.
Don't talk to these
federal
guys
tax
at
lien.
all.
That
You hear
you
me? Come on
owe
with me.
$300,000. That you own a $300,000. This is right away, sir. This is public right away. Miguel, your name. How did you get all of that money, Mr. Flores? Would you care to respond on behalf of your client? Is it true?
Why don't you guys kiss my ass?
Mr. Flores.
Though we didn't accede to any special requests, Flores and his attorney, Wayne Rowley, spoke with us the next day.
How do you find your workers?
A lot of them come on their own. They're referred through friends of mine who tell them that I work in tomatoes and oranges and so on, and they come to me to look for work.
Where did the workers come from who worked for Miguel Flores? How did he get them to South Carolina?
They would come from Guatemala and then through Arizona.
How much would he pay the coyotes?
$2,000.
$2,000. How many people would the coyotes bring in one van?
A veces 30, a veces 35. Sometimes 30, sometimes 35.
How much would those people have to pay Miguel?
500. 500.
If Ronaldo Darris is accurate, Flores makes a profit of about $15,000 for each van load of illegal workers.
If you want to believe those people, fine. The other thing is, you give us some names of these guys that said this, and where are they now? In this country, isn't that fair where you get faced by your accuser, or do you do it through news media?
Well, what we're trying to do is to provide Mr. Flores an opportunity to respond to...
He's responded and said no, and you keep going back to it, and you're beating the dead horse. He categorically denies any violation of immigration laws, period. Now go from there.
We did. Miguel Flores, it turns out, kept a second set of books. This ledger we uncovered with his daughter's name on it shows coyote fees paid to Flores by his illegal workers, fees that left them with very little money at the end of the week. Flores controls from 150 to 300 workers and moves them as needed from South Carolina to Florida. Okay. On an $800,000 a year operation, Flores reported an adjusted gross income of just over $12,000.
Based on what you know about his operation, does that sound reasonable?
No, sir.
Another man who worked for Miguel Flores. We've disguised his voice.
With the amount of people he has working for him and the amount of crews that he has going, he can make anywhere from 10 to 15 times that amount.
He has to make it himself.
Yes. You're going to take the headache of running 150 people for $12,000? No. You can get a $5 an hour job and make that much.
Here's one way Miguel Flores might supplement that $5 an hour. If you check a payroll list that he submits to farmers, many names don't belong to field workers at all, but to Flores relatives and lieutenants. Some of the Social Security numbers are false, others stolen. He can then pay his real workers whatever he wants and pocket the Social Security taxes.
If he's done all these things, why? If it's so widespread, if he's done it here in LaBelle, he's done it in Manning, why hasn't somebody arrested him?
That question is now before a grand jury.
Sheriff's office!
This is Flores' home in LaBelle, Florida. The target is Flores' organization. Most importantly, documents pertaining to his business. They found the documents, some of which showed that he had 8 coyotes on his payroll. They arrested his 2 daughters, who now face deportation. They also detained 2 of his lieutenants. Miguel Flores has yet to be charged with anything. Simultaneously, the Border Patrol raided a housing project called Turkey Run, looking for illegals. It turns out the housing was owned by a corporation whose president is Wayne Rowley, Miguel Flores' attorney. 137 workers were rounded up in this raid. All but 4 were illegal. Only 7 belonged to Miguel Flores. These men and women are now on the back leg of the long commute. Many have just been cheated out of their last paycheck. But you can rest assured they'll be back. As will Miguel Flores. The fines for smuggling illegals can be made up on 1 van load of Guatemalans.
Shutting down Miguel Flores would eliminate some very troubling and probably very violent situations. But there would be other people stepping the breach because there's a system in place that allows people like Miguel Flores to flourish. In fact, there are a lot of people that may not be quite as extreme as Miguel Flores, but do the same sorts of things. And they will move into the spot left when Miguel Flores is out of business.
By the way, Juan and Roberto, you remember them, the two men we followed from Chihuahua. Well, they too were swept up by the Border Patrol and sent home. But with the help of another coyote, they're already back at work in the United States. When we come back, it's on to California and abuse of a different kind, the story of pesticides.
People are getting trained on safe use of pesticides, but nevertheless, there are thousands of poisonings in the fields every year.
The most dangerous occupation in America, when Legacy of Shame continues.
The migrant farm worker occupies the lowest level of any major group in the American economy. The soil has produced no Samuel Gompers or John L. Lewis.
Brothers and sisters, Caesar lives on.
The soil finally did produce a great labor leader. To those who work in our fields, Cesar Chavez was Gandhi and Martin Luther King rolled into one. But he's gone. And his union, the United Farm Workers, like the 15 other unions that represent field laborers, is barely alive. They're trying to do an impossible job, unionize the only workforce not covered by federal labor law, a workforce that has thousands of replacements waiting right across the border, and new waves of Central American illegals undermining their wage scale. Proposition 187, the California initiative designed to keep illegals out, may help the union some, but not much. Workers will still find a way to cross the border, and growers have a need to keep things the way they are. There's a certain hypocrisy at work here, and it seems even the U.S. government is in on it.
Maybe 3 weeks ago, the immigration came out here, and I guess there could be some illegals out in working out, or I don't know. Then everybody kind of scattered. But the immigration guy told me, he says, we're not here to bother the people, okay? We were told to hands off.
The immigration people were told hands off?
Hands off. This is what he quoted me. We really need the help out here to do our jobs. Because the people that's living here, that's on welfare, they're not going to come out here and do our jobs. How are you going to force them to come out here to work?
Are you saying that without the Mexican workers coming in...
We're dead.
It's hypocritical, isn't it?
It's hypocritical.
Why is the hypocrisy allowed to stand?
Because everybody gains. The employers gain the workers they want. The immigrants gain a chance to earn dollars. You and I gain, we get our cheap, fresh fruits and vegetables. The system is working.
The system works also because foreign laborers are more willing to take risks. Farm work is the most dangerous occupation in America. If you worry about pesticides on food that's been washed, consider the worker who handles it in the field.
People got to understand, we don't really want to use pesticides. It costs a lot of money.
So why do you spray them if it's so expensive?
Well, the vine hoppers will just eat up the vines. You can't make a crop without it.
The size of California's agriculture is staggering. Over 700,000 farm workers plant and harvest 15% of America's crops. California is also the leading user of pesticides in this country and has the strictest pesticide regulations. Few question the need for some pesticide use. Our agriculture would resemble the third world's without it. But how we use pesticides is based on risk versus benefit. We know who gets the benefit. We also know who takes the risk.
We have an extensive set of regulations to protect those workers. But do you get rid of the chemicals entirely because there is a risk? Not at this point.
Jim Wells heads the California Department of Pesticide Regulation.
We basically look at the risk, the effect, the mitigation measures that can be employed, whether with those mitigation measures we have an acceptable risk, and if we don't, we get rid of it.
The California Department of Pesticide Regulation describes itself as the nation's best system for protection of workers. Is that a true claim?
I think it is a true claim. That is, we're doing a good job at a certain level of getting paperwork generated that records when pesticides are applied, and people are getting trained on safe use of pesticides. But nevertheless, there are thousands of poisonings in the fields every year.
No pesticide is innocuous, but some are extremely dangerous toxins, derivatives of nerve gas developed for chemical warfare.
We see a wide spectrum of problems, ranging from skin problems, pulmonary problems, and neurological problems. Tosa, por favor.
Dr. Salvador Sandoval works in a small clinic in Merced, California. He specializes in pesticide cases and is one of the few doctors farm workers trust.
I've got a lady right now with occupational asthma. She and a co-worker were eating lunch, and the ground rig came around a corner and sprayed them accidentally.
From that time on, I had a very bad cough, and I would have died. I know I would have, because of the way I felt.
Did you ever report it to the owner?
Oh, yes.
And what happened when you reported it?
She told me that that was a lie and that it was, she didn't have my time to listen to me.
Antonia Beltran isn't eligible for workman's comp because no one will admit she has an occupational illness. She's a U.S. citizen, has been a field worker for 46 years, and loves her work. She also needs her work. She's just lost her home because she can't pay the mortgage.
What would happen if workers were just to go to the owners and say, we're not going to work in your fields in these kind of conditions? What do you think would happen?
If you complain too much, pretty soon there's somebody there to replace you. You know, I've worked all my life. I've been a farm laborer all my life, from packing grapes to pruning olives, and I've worked hard.
You're hurt that you can't go back to work, aren't you?
I am.
If you want to know how easily something like this can happen, just wander down Route 101 on any given day and look around. Here's a helicopter spraying an insecticide. What kind of insecticide exactly, we can't say. The sign that by law is supposed to tell us doesn't. Within a few minutes, our crew is feeling slightly nauseous, but no big deal. We'd be gone soon. But if you look closely, you'll see workers on the side road, right next to the spraying. And in an adjacent field, there's irrigation going on. The wind-borne spray getting watered into the soil. In another adjacent field, there are workers picking and sorting lettuce. Lettuce that's going directly from this field to you.
Did anyone give you any warning that there was going to be spraying in the field across the road?
No, nobody tell us anything about it.
If you knew there was spraying out here, would you have let your workers...
we won't be here.
Before the spraying stopped, workers who set up the irrigation pipes were walking into the sprayed field.
¿Qué andan haciendo?
The irrigation worker, his name is Francisco, told us he wasn't warned that this field would be sprayed, nor did he know what pesticide was being used. He knew it was dangerous, but wanted to keep his job.
Here, what happens is they fire you. They don't give you decent boots. They give you used boots that don't last at all. Like now, I'm wearing torn boots. Look.
Pesticide was leaking through a hole in his boot, but Francisco returned to a field that fairly glistened with insecticide.
We've done surveys of farm workers, and about 40% say that they've been exposed to pesticides, and about half of those say that they've had symptoms.
If Dr. Sandoval's calculations are accurate, that would translate to about 125,000 poisonings statewide. How many actual poisonings there are isn't certain. While there's a system in place for investigation, it doesn't work.
Each county has their own agricultural department and their own commissioner and staff. And that staff is responsible for pesticide enforcement on the ground level.
There's the problem. The agricultural commissioner The county politician, whose main constituents are the growers, is entrusted with pesticide enforcement. This holds true for most states in the Union.
And I have never gotten any feedback in written form or callback from ag commissioners.
Over how many years are we talking now? 5
Well,
years?
I've been working with this clinic 14 years.
14 years.
Yes.
The report that the doctor originates is supposed to go to the ag commissioner, and the ag commissioner is supposed to investigate. What we found in Monterey County when we examined all of the reported illnesses and pesticide law violations in that county over a several-year period, that out of 1,000 violations and reports of illnesses, there had only been citations or fines in 15 cases.
According to the commissioner, things have improved somewhat since that study. In 1994, the last year reported, 1 out of 6 cases resulted in fines. But consider this. For the 76,000 commercial farms in California, the Department of Pesticide Regulation has a budget for 36 field inspectors.
As a general rule, pesticides are dangerous, correct?
Well, pesticides kill things. That's what they're there for.
What's the justification for it?
Producing food. People, even the most ardent anti-chemical people, usually acknowledge the fact that at least for now, there's going to be some level of pesticide use if we want to keep the production up the way we want to keep it up, and if we want to keep the price down the way we want to keep it down.
We came to California because it's the best state in the union for protecting workers from pesticide poisoning. The federal pesticide regulations now in place, regulations not as strict as California's, are under attack. State agricultural commissioners across the country are putting pressure on Congress to repeal them. When we come back, as good as it gets for our migrant workers, a grower who's found a better way.
This is Belgrade, Florida. The migrants call it their home.
Just a few miles and 35 years down the road from this scene is a situation so different as to be astonishing. A farming operation that views decency to its workers as a function of good business. A. Duda and Sons. As a businessman, what's the benefit to you of having a reputation of being maybe the best to work for?
We have two bottom lines. One, we obviously have to make a profit to be able to stay in business. But how we deal with people, how we treat people, what a reputation is just as important. Well, it may be more important.
They do treat their people well. Workers at the Duda farms get decent housing at a low price, education and daycare for their children, and first-rate fringe benefits.
We have holidays and vacations, and a pension plan and medical. We also have a 401k plan for our seasonal workers and full-time workers.
This sounds generous, and it is. But you should know this. If the minimum wage for farm workers was doubled, the cost of a head of lettuce would go up only 11 cents. A large can of chili peppers, just 4 cents.
66 cents of every dollar that you pay at the grocery store is paid to people for what they do after the food leaves the farm. It's bringing it to the terminal markets, it's distributing it out to wholesalers, it's getting it out to the retail stores.
And advertising it?
And advertising it as well.
A Duda field hand costs only 1/3 more than the minimum, and there's a payback.
From an economic standpoint, if you get the same people back, even with its benefits, you may be getting the job done just as cheap as retraining people.
It's been argued that the Dudas are more generous because the size and diversity of their company enables them to be. They have farms in Florida, Texas, and California. And at the peak of the harvest season, there are 3,000 workers in their Florida operation alone. But there's more to it than that. This wasn't always a great place to work. In the mid-70s, Duda Farms was accused of all manner of violations. The most important step the Dudas took to change things was to reduce the hiring of freelance crew leaders and take away their power.
We have taken those crew leaders and put them in-house. Now we call them crew foremen, and their primary responsibility is to assist with the recruiting and oversee the quality of work that his crew or her crew is performing. We do the paying.
That's what really separates Duda Farms from most of the rest. Instead of hiding behind a crew leader, they've taken direct responsibility for their actions. If everyone did that, most of the abuses visited on our migrant workers would disappear. Some final thoughts in a moment. Seen tonight, migrant workers are the most exploited and vulnerable among us. There are many laws in place to protect them now, though they're unevenly enforced. And there are advocacy groups doing valuable work on their behalf. Yes, the Mexican worker is getting a better deal here than on the other side of the border. But is that the measure Americans want to apply? The short answer and tough truth is yes. This agricultural system has been in place since the end of slavery, and few actually want to change it. So, sad to say, years from now, the Border Patrol will likely still be putting in the overtime, and some journalists yet unborn will stand in a field lamenting the obvious and exhorting our children to remember those who feed us. For CBS Reports, I'm Dan Rather.
To order a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $7 to Burrell's Transcripts, Box 7, Livingston, New Jersey, 07039, or call 1-800-777-TEXT. To order a video cassette, call 1-800-934-NEWS. That's 1-800-934-NEWS.
Let's have the jury.
Stay with us. Coming up on 48 Hours, O.J. Simpson mounts his defense.
If you think you've won the case, do you avoid that gamble? Do you just not put your client on the stand?
If you're ahead, you want to stay ahead all the way to the end.
We'll have the latest from the trial. And if you want to know what's good for you, find out how to eat better and conquer your fear of fat. 48 Hours is next.